we started seeing announcements coming out of your office of some changes occurring in the Senate, which was independent senators crossing the floor and joining the Conservative Party. So should we expect any other potential changes to the Conservative caucus in the coming year?
Well, look.
Welcome back to Northern Perspective, everyone. We have a very special repeat guest on the show today. The last time we interviewed him, we were actually in his office on Parliament Hill in the Senate. And now this person is now the Senate caucus leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. And he's a very passionate Canadian, very passionate Conservative, and a common sense person all around. Senator Housakos, welcome back to Northern Perspective.
Thank you for having me back on this wonderful show.
And thanks for joining us in studio, because it's a little bit easier for us, so we appreciate that.
It's fantastic to be here.
All right. Let's just start with the election. The last time we spoke was in the summer of 2024, and we were talking about what the upcoming election might look like, when it might happen, but we need to catch up. The world changed, and the election occurred, and we didn't get the result that we wanted. But what was going through your head and even the Senate caucus in terms of what you were observing as we led up to the election and the eventual result?
Well, like everyone else, we were hoping for change. The Canadian public, in my opinion, got bamboozled yet again by a Liberal Party that tried to personify change by changing a leader, but keeping literally every other member of cabinet and the people that gave us the increased capital gains tax, the people that gave us the carbon tax, the people that have taxed Canadians to death over the last 9 years are still the people running this government. Make no mistake about it. They just changed Uber drivers. They jumped in the back seat, and it's still Minister Champagne and Minister Freeland and company that have created this lost decade for Canadians under the Liberal rule. They've changed the face of the party. And now they've said to Canadians, here's change. Unfortunately, a large number of Canadians fell for it. We have to take solace in the fact that we got an extraordinary good result at 42% of the vote. We have 144 outstanding members of Parliament that make up a very strong opposition. But that's not what the country needed. That's not what we need. And we need to do better.
Yeah, we ended up with the largest official opposition in the history of Canada since 1867. But as you said, it's not enough. It's not enough, and we need more. Now, the one thing I would challenge you on is that I think that we did get change with Carney versus Trudeau, because he's actually spending a lot more than Justin Trudeau ever could. And I don't think any of us even thought that was even possible. We went from a gobsmacking $62 billion deficit last year that was presented on the floor of the House of Commons. Presented, I'll just say, dropped on the desk because the Liberals didn't have the courage to actually stand up and present it. And you just heard the gasps throughout the House when they heard that deficit. And the C.D. Howe Institute put out a estimate recently that they're expecting, if nothing changes, that there's going to be a $92 billion deficit, which is 50% more than Freeland's, who is supposedly the fiscally irresponsible finance minister. What does that say about what Mark Carney views our tax dollars as in terms of their value?
Look, we all know that over the last decade of Liberal rule, we have historic debt, historic deficits. And for the first time in the history of this country, we are spending more in financing the national debt than we are in healthcare transfer payments. So if we think that our healthcare systems are cracking from coast to coast to coast, we can thank a runaway train of fiscal irresponsibility in Ottawa. And to have a prime minister who campaigned on the premise of doing better, of being more fiscally responsible, and not even taking the time in his first few weeks and his first couple of months as prime minister to table a budget and actually take steps to back up the talk, he's done the contrary. So it creates uncertainty. We see the uncertainty in the marketplace. We see the uncertainty right now in terms of where the trade negotiations are going on with Donald Trump and the U.S. administration. and all Canadians should be concerned.
Why do you think he didn't table a budget?
I think he didn't table a budget because he's hiding from the track record of his government. And one, we have to remind Canadians, he was a senior economic advisor to this government and the previous government led by Justin Trudeau. So he talked out of both sides of his mouth during the electoral campaign. He was successful at doing so. I hope that the Canadian public understands, and they will. I believe there will be buyer's remorse soon. We got the fall budget. They can't run forever coming around the corner. Our understanding is that the number of consultants that are being hired by the government is skyrocketing on a weekly basis. I think now it's over $61 billion in consultants. So like I said, at some point, you got to walk the talk, and we need to have real change in this country. Unfortunately, in the very near future, that isn't possible. And that's on the Canadian public. They took a decision. We respect it. We Conservatives believe in democracy. We will work with this government. We're facing some existential crisis as well that needs to be addressed. But by the same token, the Canadian public has to be more engaged. They have to understand and listen and take note what happens in the House of Commons, what happens in the Senate, what is going on in political discourse, because it does affect your bottom line. It affects your pocket. It affects your family. It affects the education system where you send your children and grandchildren to study. It affects our healthcare system where mom and dad and our grandparents, and at some point we're going to need health coverage. All these elements in our society that are so important to our day-to-day life are affected by decisions taken by governments.
Speaking of engagement, one of the questions that we hear a lot on Northern Perspective, or I suppose two of the questions is, number one, who is my senator? And number two, how can I contact them?
Well, senators represent provinces, not particular districts. Unfortunately for our viewership in Western Canada, they've been gypped through the years and they do not get equal representation in the upper chamber, which is a cause of concern. And even though I come from Quebec and we get 24 senators in the province of Quebec, Ontario gets 24, Atlantic provinces get 32. The Western provinces, all combined from Manitoba to British Columbia, only get 6 each. So unfortunately, that needs to be addressed at some point in time, but that's for another show. What you can do is go to the Senate website. Each senator has a public email. Reach out to them. I can tell you I respond to all my emails as much as I can. I call back my constituents. And you don't have to be from the province of Quebec. I answer all constituents. I get a sense that...
We can attest to that. So.
Yeah, look, it's imperative. I believe that when you're paid by taxpayers, you serve all taxpayers, all Canadians. So look at the Senate as it's supposed to be, which is a place of sober second thought. It's a supplementary body to our democratic chamber. And if you feel like you're not being heard adequately in the House by your members of the House of Commons, senators are just an added voice for you to talk about the issues that are important.
And we also hear sometimes our members will come to us and say, there's a bill in the Senate right now that's very concerning for me. What can I do about it? How can I get involved?
You can come and provide testimony at committees when we have second reading reviews of bills and legislation. You can reach out to your senator and meet with them, contact them, write them. You'd be surprised the degree of influence a Canadian citizen has over building motions, policies, and legislation when you execute that power. So reach out to senators. You'll be surprised. They will respond. They will listen. They'll be attentive. And I think that's the best way to influence public policy.
Well, and I think we saw evidence of that when the Liberals were trying to ram through their GST holiday bill. I think a lot of people thought it was just going to be a walk in the park in the Senate, but we covered the Finance Committee where Chrystia Freeland attended, and it was not an easy committee for her. She was being scrutinized left, right, and center from senators of all of the different factions, not just the Conservatives. It was, in some cases, it was even more scrutinizing from the independent senators groups than it was the Conservatives.
Yeah, the one benefit of an appointed body is the fact that senators get a sense of independence from their, virtue of tenure. You're there till the age of 75. You're not worried about the Prime Minister recalling you. You don't have necessarily the worries the members of the House of Commons do of having to get reelected. So you have the liberty of being a little bit more robust, a little bit more aggressive sometimes than necessary. And most importantly, you have the freedom to express what you believe is right rather than what is politically expedient. So you see that very often in Senate deliberations. But I want to add another thing for the viewers where, to your question, Tanya, which is very important, how do you affect public policy? The most important way is to become a member of a political party that you believe in, a party that you feel represents your philosophy of life. And I encourage our viewers to join the Conservative Party of Canada, one that I believe is principled and has the right values. And that's how you influence policy, because policy in Canada, we forget that. We're not like the United States of America. We're not a unitary form of government. We're a Westminster body policies driven by political parties. At a political convention like the one that the Conservative Party is having in January 26, that's where policy and ideas are discussed. So when a Canadian signs up, becomes a member of a party, becomes a delegate at a policy convention, you're at the table, at the embryonic stage of where we're building public policy. So join the political party of your choice, obviously the best one out there, and I think the one that is the most transparent, the one that has the most common sense, and the one that is the most open to grassroots participation is our party, the Conservative Party.
And on that point as well, you don't need even a member of parliament actually representing your riding to actually put forth policy. We interviewed somebody from the NDG Westmount riding in Quebec. They don't have a member of parliament that is a Conservative, and they were successful in actually getting a policy onto the policy board of the Conservatives at the last convention. So you don't need a Michael Barrett, an Anna Roberts, a Michael Cooper type of member of parliament that's a Conservative in order to actually bring that change forward and be successful in doing so.
100%. Grassroots democracy works at the grassroots level, and you're absolutely right, Ryan. You don't have to have a member of parliament. If you have a riding association in your riding, participate, become a delegate, go to the convention. A member of the House of Commons or a senator has the same voice, the same privileges in a political party as any member or anybody else who takes out a membership card.
Now, there's one question I want to ask you, because we started noticing some changes in the Senate following the election, and we started seeing announcements coming out of your office of some changes occurring in the Senate, which was independent senators crossing the floor and joining the Conservative Party. We thought that was really interesting to see what was happening, because one of the things that the Conservative caucus in the Senate, as our viewers may or may not know, which is an issue, which no doubt you see, is over time it's shrinking because we haven't had a Conservative Prime Minister to appoint new Conservative senators. So you seem to be solving that problem by taking advantage of Justin Trudeau's Senate reform and having conversations either publicly or privately with some of these independent senators and convincing them that, maybe their current group is not the best one to sit with. Can you talk a little bit about that and the evolution of the Senate that we're seeing?
Yeah, look, the Senate has always been a fluid place, gone through peaks and valleys, and has evolved through the years. The Trudeau government has instituted this new independent Senate that is not always that independent all the time. If you look at the voting records, 95% of the time, Trudeau-appointed senators voted for government legislation. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. We Conservatives, I think, voted more often for government legislation than they voted against. It's just the numbers speak for themselves. Since the election and since Justin Trudeau is no longer there, I think the Trudeau appointees have felt a sense of more independence, so to speak, true independence. And some of them are starting to express their true feelings. And we were fortunate enough after the campaign to entice 3 members to join our caucus: Senator David Richards from New Brunswick, Senator Mary Jane McCullum from Manitoba. Both of them were Trudeau appointees. I think they appreciate the way that we have handled ourselves in the Senate. We've been transparent, even though we demand accountability from the government. I think they realized that we should demand more from the government. I think they realized the Senate has a role to play in holding the government to account. So we were very happy to add those two senators. We got back as well Senator Larry Smith, who was actually a Harper appointee who left our caucus a few years ago and came back and basically has voiced his displeasure with the direction the country has taken. And he felt it incumbent on his part to come back and help the opposition, because any political chamber in our Westminster system that doesn't have a strong, robust opposition isn't a legitimate chamber. Parliament means nothing unless government is being challenged. And right now, unfortunately, 85% of senators have been appointed. Imagine by a prime minister who's no longer even in government. So, senators have to look back at and reflect and review the institution and understand we need to make changes to that institution, or if we want it to be continuously legitimate as we go into the 21st century. So I believe in Senate reform, always have. And I think the Senate has to be more representative, has to be more equal, and has to be more transparent. I don't have all the solutions, but I do believe we have to have a discussion when it comes to that as well. No government in the last 30 years, the last one was the government of Brian Mulroney in 1989, 1990, that actually had a frank discussion regarding the upper chamber and what we need to do to reform it. And of course, Prime Minister Harper, in all fairness, attempted to reform it. He sent us an issue to the Supreme Court for a ruling, and the Supreme Court, of course, ruled that no government can unilaterally make changes without provincial participation. And that, of course, is a challenge.
So should we expect any other potential changes to the Conservative caucus in the coming year?
Well, look, from the Senate side, we will continue to try to charm, entice open-minded senators, regardless of which prime minister appointed them, to join the right caucus and the right perspective. You have the northern perspective here with your wonderful audience, but in the Senate, we have the conservative, right, common sense perspective that we will continue to put forward. We've made it clear that we intend to be less partisan than the House. We intend to be constructive, but we intend to be robust. Like I said, we intend to challenge the government, hold it to account, and not be afraid to come forward with proposals that are bold in scope. It's important, I believe, in Parliament to be bold. It's important to ask for change that's substantive. Even if it's coming from the Senate or the House, people forget that in the Senate we can table legislation, we can initiate legislation. I did that with a piece of legislation a couple of years ago on autism, S203, a bill that I'm so proud of. But unfortunately, the government, again, dropped the ball. And we've seen so many times where governments have become contemptuous of Parliament. They ignore motions, they ignore bills. That has to stop as well. And I'm hopeful that Prime Minister Carney changes the direction that Prime Minister Trudeau had been. How many times did we see motions unanimously passed in the House of Commons, recognizing the IRGC, for example, as a terrorist organization, and yet his government never respected the will of Parliament. They had to wait until 5 minutes to midnight before an election call in order to finally, after years of pressure from the opposition, list the IRGC as a terrorist organization. And then after that is done, we still find out a few months ago through media sources that the IRGC has been laundering money, and officials from the IRGC have been living right here and prospering in our country, and family members of the IRGC. That kind of contempt towards Parliament, our democracy, and our institutions is what is causing such loss of faith by the Canadian public in our institutions, in our government. So Prime Minister Carney has to take note of this. Every member of the House of Commons has to take note of it. And I say it every day of the week that even senators who are appointed, particularly because they're appointed, we have to take notice of this and understand that credibility has to be earned. The Canadian public will not respect you just because you have a title. You have to do the right things, but you have to take action, not just words. So that's my perspective.
Well, and even on that, these appointed senators need to understand that they have a legacy to think of in terms of what their performance is going to be in the Senate. The Senate has I think, a golden opportunity, especially right now, to demonstrate to the Canadian people that they're not just a rubber stamp. It's legitimately the house of second thought, and they could push back against a lot of this radical legislation that might be coming through. Unfortunately, we see some Senate bills that have germinated since the election and has some Canadians a little concerned. One of them involves lowering the voting age of Canadians down to, I believe it's 16. And it looks like there's another kind of similar Online Harms Act-ish bill that has been put forth in the Senate. But just to kind of allay the fears of Canadians, most Senate bills on the majority never end up passing all the way, do they?
No, and the Senate historically has always understood its role as a body of sober second thought. When we oppose government legislation, we amend it. We can delay it. There have been very rare and few occasions in the last 50 years that government legislation has been defeated in the Senate. A lot of Senate private members' bills, as we call them, Senate public bills by senators, have become law. But that in itself requires, obviously, the support of both chambers. So, the bills you just mentioned, every bill that, deserves debate and contemplation and reflection and discussion. I believe that. And every bill deserves to see its day in the sun and get a vote. If you can persuade people using common sense and the power of persuasion, then you'll be successful. That's what I believe is the role of the Senate. And particularly in the case of the Senate, if we respect the wishes of the founders of this country, John A. Macdonald and George Etienne Cartier, the role of the Senate was to have a frank discussion without any political pressures. When it's all said and done at the end of the day, regardless of the amendments coming from the Senate or the wishes of the Senate, the government and the House has the final say. By and large, that has always been respected. But there have been some key moments, even very recently in the history of our parliament. If you remember during the sad day in Canada, the saddest day probably in our democracy, when the Trudeau government put into place the Emergency Measures Act, during the very peaceful, friendly protests on Wellington Avenue of exasperated Canadians, hardworking Canadians, the Senate was critical in getting the Trudeau government to pull back on that particular bill. People don't realize that he hastily called press conference and rushed, and the government finally withdrew the Emergency Measures Act when the Senate was just about to have a vote. And the Prime Minister's office was following that debate. And for the first time, I have to say, there was a significant number of Trudeau-appointed independent senators who thought this was wrong. This was too much. So the Conservative caucus led that fight. We led that fight vociferously. But there were a number of independent Trudeau senators who had the decency, the common sense, the respect for the rule of law to say that this is the greatest infringement on civil rights we have ever seen in our lifetime, and we won't tolerate it. And that particular vote never happened because the government rescinded the Emergency Measures Act. But it would have been razor thin. So if it would have passed, it would have been a huge embarrassment to a government that had appointed 80% of those senators. And if it wouldn't have passed, then it would have been even a bigger embarrassment for the government. So this is the kind of tacit role, and in this case, not so tacit, that senators in the Senate can play in influencing our democracy and protecting our democracy.
Now, to Canadians that are feeling defeated, that are feeling a sense of despair, that are feeling just hopeless because of the recent election result, what would you say to them in terms of the future of our country and why they need to dust themselves off, stand up, and continue to fight?
Look, I understand our disappointment. I feel it like every conservative across the country. And I think every common sense Canadian who wasn't a conservative necessarily, but voted conservative because they knew it was the right thing to do. But there is hope. There's always hope, because the beauty with democracy is we have elections every 4 years. The beauty with democracy, it's never permanent. Now, for all of us in the conservative movement, we need to take note of why we fell short and what we need to do better in order to gain the confidence of the majority of Canadians. So that's the message I really have for everybody. We're also going to give Mark Carney an opportunity and the runway necessary to show that he's going to do what he was given the mandate to do. And then it's our job to hold him to account if he doesn't do it. But we need to be also a very constructive opposition. Our leader and our party has shown that with Bill C-5 and the speech from the throne. We made, as a party in the House of Commons, very constructive amendments to that bill. We support any energy project in this country that this country is in desperate need of. And that's an example of our maturity as a party and how we talk about practicing common sense. But now Prime Minister Carney and the Liberals, who have created a degree of expectation in this country that things are going to change, I really hope, for the sake of the process of nation building, that the Liberals understand that this is a crossroads for Canada. The Liberal Party cannot continue to do what they've done for the last decade, which is signal right, go left, signal left, run in the middle, and continue this exercise of double talk and misguiding the Canadian public. I think the level of frustration is very, very high amongst the Canadian public. And it's incumbent on the government to bring the country together. It's incumbent on the opposition to hold the government to account. And I think Pierre Poilievre and the whole Conservative caucus understands that we need to do a better job in making a demonstration to the Canadian people that we're ready to govern when the Liberals fail us, and if they fail us.
Senator Caucus, thanks for joining us on the show today.
Thank you so much.